Zoom and on Facebook. We are live streaming this evening on Facebook. Thank you to all the people who are joining us on Zoom. Just wait one more minute to get started. Thank you for joining us this evening. I see a lot of shout outs in the chat. Please feel free to say hi. Great. All right, let's get started. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Elaine Spivak-Rodriguez, National Co-Coordinator with Alliance for Global Justice. I'm excited to be facilitating this webinar this evening. I first want to mention our interpretation services. We have English to Spanish and Spanish to English. So if you are bilingual, you can stay right where you are. You don't need to move at all. Joe and Monica will both be speaking in Spanish. If you would like the English version of this webinar, you'll need to join us on Zoom, first of all, and select the English interpretation room in the little icon on the lower part of your screen. Our interpreter tonight is Ana Torres from Argentina. Thank you for joining us. She'll be providing simultaneous translation. If you need any help connecting with in the rooms, you can feel free to chat us and we'll try to help you out with that. We'll be recording this webinar. We'll make two versions of it, a Spanish and an English. Roger Harris is helping us record the alternative, or the English version. I'll be recording the Spanish version. So thank you, Roger. This webinar is co-hosted by several organizations, and I'm not finding the list of those organizations in front of me. So I'll put those in the chat when I'm done with my intro. But I did want to introduce our speakers and turn it over so we can get started. The whole reason that you're here tonight. This webinar is titled Ecuador's Presidential Elections, the Left and Latin America. Joe Emersberger will be interviewing Monica Palacios. Joe is an engineer based in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. He is of Ecuadorian roots and in recent years has written frequently about Ecuador for Fair.org and Counterpunch. He is the author with Justin Podur of the forthcoming book, Extraordinary Threat, the US Empire and Media and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. We'll need to get you back for that once that's released, Joe.
Great.
I'll also introduce Monica. She's a 33-year-old Ecuadorian migrant residing in New York since 2006. She worked at the Ecuadorian consulate in New York during Rafael Correa's administration. Monica is launching her candidacy for National Assembly on behalf of migrants under the Center Democrats, listed as the main candidate. So thank you again for joining us. Please let me know if you have any questions in the chat, and please submit your questions using the Q&A box in the lower part of your screen. We'll save the last 10 minutes for attendee questions, so please feel free to use that as to submit any questions that you have as they come up. Thank you.
Okay. Am I good to go?
Yep.
Okay. Bueno, gracias a todos que organizaron este evento.
Thank you to everyone who organized this event. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here talking to our candidate for the National Assembly of Ecuador in representation of the migrants who live in the US and Canada,
Yes.
Monica Palacios. She is a candidate for list 1, the list in support of ex-President Rafael Correa, leader of citizens' revolution. In case some of you don't know, Rafael Correa was a president since 2007 up until 2017, and he was the leader of this project known as Citizens' Revolution. The current president, Lenin Moreno, won the elections, the presidential election in 2017, promising that he'd continue the same policies, but right away, just as soon as he came into office, he immediately became the worst enemy of the citizens' revolution, betraying everyone. And this has been hidden in the main international media of the US, Canada, and Europe as well. I've written a little bit about this. And so my first question, Monica, is if you could tell us a bit about the persecution that the Correa supporters have faced in Ecuador, because a lot of people don't know about this. This has been hidden, especially the obstacles you've had to face just to be on the ballot, representing the citizens' revolution. That's right. Thank you very much.
In English, but it's an appreciation from me and my party to be here tonight. Así que sí, Joe, realmente hemos estado sufriendo, pues.
Yes, Joe, we have been suffering political persecution, or rabid persecution on behalf of this government, but we need to understand truly what is happening here at the South American level. And what we are experiencing right now is this lawfare, as you well know, that is the judicialization of politics, which uses judicial institutions to persecute political adversaries. This was started by the CIA here in the US. It's not anything new. This was a plan that started being aimed at South America in around 2005, where there started to be several progressive governments in Latin America, including Chavez in Venezuela, Evo Morales in Bolivia, also in Argentina, among others. So the leaders of the left in South America are being persecuted right now. This several famous cases were used against us in Ecuador and also here in the US to persecute us. And up until now, there aren't any kind of clear proof about the supposed corruption cases that involved the leaders of citizen revolution in Ecuador. And as you mentioned yourself, when Lenin Moreno came into office, he did not win because he was Lenin Moreno. He didn't have any kind of work before that could support him. He won thanks to the political program of the Citizens' Revolution, of good living. That's why he was elected. And as soon as he came into office, he started persecuting judicially the leaders of Citizens' Revolution, among them our leader, Rafael Correa, whom until now has 39 cases against him, 39 charges against him, and the most famous one of them, the case of bribes, as they call them. Supposedly, his secretary had a notebook, which was even proved that she bought after the trial started. There are some handwritten evidence there, which is actually evidence for nothing. This was even proven in international courts, and it's a mockery, of course, because there's no actual evidence and there are no proofs of what really happened. And even the witnesses who were there, they were unable to share any kind of consistent statement regarding what had happened. But the most terrible case, and the one that fills us with more sadness, is the case of our vice president, who was elected democratically
poder
He
igualmente.
was in office together with Lenin Moreno, and there was a fierce persecution against him and against his good name. And as you know, again, the media, the hegemonic media are being used against him. They begin with mediatic persecution, and after that, the judges have no choice but to say that yes, what the media says is true. And we know that's not the case. He was arrested and he has received yet another 8-year sentence, and he is in quite a terrible situation. I've talked to relatives, we have had different conversations, and it's evident that he was at no fault. The only thing that he tried to do was to keep defending the power of the people. When Lenin Moreno came into office, then among him and with him, different groups of power started trying to exert control. And that's why what we say right now is that who is actually in power in the country is Guillermo Lasso with his group of banker friends. In the end, it was the political program of the losing candidate that won. And that's what we are suffering right now in Ecuador. It's also important to mention that as we know, this is a plan that reaches the whole of South America. And we need to understand that the corporate media are intertwined. They work jointly. These aren't just independent or isolated media in each country, but rather they are all controlled, most of the times by Agency F, which controls all of the media at the Americas level, and they share one single message that is sent by the power groups and the CIA. The party, Center Democrats, the name isn't even your name, is a borrowed name. We had to make alliances because they never allowed Correa and his allies to use the name of their own party. Could you tell us a bit more about this? What we saw in the announcements and the campaigns. Yes, of course. Aside from this entire political persecution, we've also had other kinds of persecution from the other state institutions, among them the National Electoral Council. So what's been happening is that, first of all, they took from us, Mr. Lenin Moreno with his group, took from us the name of the party, País Alliance. So then we had to put together a different bloc called Citizen Revolution, but we don't have the political party. We tried to sign a new one, and we were working also with a different political party, but we already knew that something was working against us and they wouldn't allow us to have the judicial entity we needed to be able to work with this political party, and that's precisely what happened. But luckily, we did have a plan B, which was Center Democrats, list one. They gave us the opportunity to work with them, and that allowed us to be part of the elections together with them. But what's happening right now, and it's quite funny, is that one disposition of the Electoral Council says that we cannot use either the figure nor the voice of Rafael Correa in any publicity spot in radio, TV, and so on. So what are they trying to do? What they're trying to do is to silence us, to silence our voice. Citizens' Revolution is the main political power in Ecuador. We have with us the activism of the people and the will to struggle, and everyone knows it in Ecuador and also beyond our borders. We know that thanks to Rafael Correa, there was a transformation in the country, and this is evident. They want to silence us. They don't want people to know that we're not 35, list 35 anymore. There's a lot of confusion. We saw just today that Jimena Peña, the candidate for president, is using the voice and the figure of our leader, Rafael Correa, for her own publicity. And the Electoral Council has said absolutely nothing about this. It's amazing to see also how they use the Guayaquil municipality vehicles to make publicity for Guillermo Lasso. In Guayaquil, taxi drivers are being forced on behalf of the municipality to play spots for Guillermo Lasso. I was just talking to someone today that said, if I don't do that, they won't give me work. It's better not to avoid being in problems with these people. So the institutions of the state are being used for political propaganda. We know that we know they have a lot of fear, because as soon as we win, all of the things that they have done will be controlled, and many of them will probably go to jail. So it's very amusing. I never heard of being unable to use the figure of a leader that represents us to publicize the program of our party. And other parties, among them, the one from Guillermo Lasso, he is using the figure of Jaime Lebo, who also has nothing to do with this election in itself. It's as if Democrats were unable to use the image of Obama in their elections. Despite all of this persecution, the one thing this government has done, they haven't done any kind of construction or anything, but they're focused on persecution. And despite that, they are showing very good results in the polls. So what is that like? What we are looking at in Ecuador es
aceptar esta nueva figura que no era tan conocida, pero realmente Andrés Arauz ha demostrado liderazgo, ha demostrado su carisma y su calidad de persona, y también ya trabajó durante la presidencia de nuestro líder Rafael Correa, realmente trabajó en el beneficio de todos nosotros.
A lot of work done.
Puedo decir que como economista,
Rafael Correa already
actuar si queremos ser más pues capitalistas o socialistas, y nos hemos dado cuenta que él realmente está buscando una sociedad justa y equitativa para todos. Así que realmente se ha demostrado eso en todas sus entrevistas, sus declaraciones, en las caravanas. Yo también compartí con él, y realmente es una calidad de persona que no se encuentra en todos lados. Igualmente nuestro vicepresidente Carlos Rabascal, con el cual también tuve la oportunidad de
our vice president, someone that I was also able to share with. They are people who've worked their entire lives for the benefit of everyone in Ecuador. So that is why we are winning. And we are very,
no hay ningún ecuatoriano.
Our numbers are very close in the poll. And just as I mentioned before, nowhere in the world, with any Ecuadorian person that I have come into dialogue with, no one says that they are better now than they were with Rafael Correa. Absolutely everyone acknowledges that we were doing better with Rafael Correa, and that is a fact. In October 2019, Moreno had, there were strong mobilizations against Moreno. He was already in problems. But then we had COVID, pandemic came. And the numbers now state around 15,000 deaths. There was an analysis from Financial Times, a magazine from the right, and according to their analysis, it's actually around 40,000 deaths.
Más de lo promedio que sabe haber.
So this is more than the average of cases.
Si quiere, 5 peores del mundo. Entonces,
the pandemic is, the situation of the country is one of the worst, among the 5 worst worldwide. So how can we explain this? How is it possible that they managed this so poorly? Why was there so much incompetence in dealing with the pandemic? Well, let me tell you that in Ecuador, ever since they came into power, we've had less than 1%. Right now, we are less than 12% growth in the year, minus 12%. So what Lenin Moreno did, he started implementing extreme neoliberal policies. And we know worldwide that neoliberal policies never help. There is no country worldwide that has ever benefited from neoliberalism. What they began doing from the very beginning of their administration was to, as they call it, monetize, this is to privatize state institutions. This began with different hydroelectric plants. Now they're trying to do this with the Pacific Bank and also the Central Bank. There was also a very serious problem in which they let off thousands of public officials, and many of them were involved in the public health system. So when the pandemic struck, we didn't have enough personnel. The purchases needed hadn't been done as well. So basically, we were completely unprepared. We didn't have doctors, nurses, we didn't have the people needed, and we didn't have the materials that we needed to help those who were ill. When the pandemic began, it was a very serious situation in Ecuador. We didn't have masks, any kind of protection materials. We didn't have ventilators. The beds in the hospitals were full, and the measures, the corrective measures weren't taken in time. It was allowed, for example, in Guayaquil, the organization of an event. There was a game in a stadium where 30,000 people came together to see one of the most important teams in Ecuador. And also there were different events with a lot of people. So the measures weren't taken in time. And if we hadn't had the hospitals built by the Citizens' Revolution, it wouldn't have been only for 40,000 deaths, but much more. And the first state-of-the-art technology that the Citizens' Revolution left in those hospitals. So it's been terrible. And the worst of all is that these 8,000 vaccines came to Ecuador. And can you believe that the health minister takes them directly into the residence of this luxury residence for elderly, where his mother and some of his friends lived, instead of giving the vaccine to the people who are health workers. They are risking their lives daily. And can you believe that they weren't given the vaccine in benefit of family and friends? Whatever it is that Moreno has right now, about 7% of support. That's almost no popular support at all. But he also doesn't seem to care much about this. He wrote an article in Miami Herald where he says he'd work up until the last day to serve the US. Now, it's not exactly his words, but I'm worried about what you mentioned in terms of the privatization of central bank. What he's trying to do, apparently, is to tie the hands on any new government. So how do you see this project of privatizing central bank? Will this take place, or do you believe it won't make any progress? I hope and I call on the consciousness of our representatives in Ecuador for them to stop harming our people. What they want is that the main council of the central bank may now be people from the private banks, that they should be the ones to make decisions. This would tie our hands and leave us once again in the hands of these power groups. We are talking about bankers who only work for themselves and their own interest. And this is very clear. They just want to see the benefit for the companies, and that's it, and at any cost. So again, neoliberalism, what it has as a goal is that these transnational corporations continue benefiting worldwide from the poverty and the need of poor countries such as Ecuador. So then what would happen if central bank is privatized, let's say? Let's say that Arauz wins now, and let's hope that's the case, but the central bank is privatized. And what does he need to do? Would it take a national assembly, or perhaps it would be that the judges stop being so afraid of the media?
¿Qué van a hacer
How, what do you think would be done in order to implement the proposals from Arauz? Because this would require the resources from central bank. Well, it would be necessary to have most of our representatives elected and to have a constituent assembly where we could reverse a lot of the damage done to our country. But what if this doesn't happen? The problem is that when Andres Arauz comes into office, he won't be able to take any kind of financial decisions. They'll have a lot of good ideas and a lot of will to work for the economic recovery. But if he cannot control the central bank as part of the executive, as is always the case, then our hands will be tied. So we need to work in bringing forth a constituent assembly to be able to reverse this. I heard that you got to the US in 2006, so you were very young. And I believe it was in the year 1999 where we had the worst financial disaster in Ecuador. I believe at the time it was the most independent central bank in the world. Everyone was proud of this, but very soon thereafter, everything came apart. So you already went through this. Well, this also was due to the Washington agreement. A lot of the power on the superintendency over the Ecuadorian banks was eliminated. So they started organizing loans amongst themselves to the harm of their users. There was no kind of governmental control over them. And this is what made it so that a lot of people lost their savings. And this terrible day where 2 million Ecuadorians left their country. And what happened at the time? The government had a printer where they simply followed the orders of these banks, and they had absolutely no kind of control. And of course, since then, inflation grew, we got to the level of hyperinflation, and we had no our economy. And all of this happened when I was in the 6th grade, so in elementary school, and I'll never forget this time. I remember that they would send us to school with $1, and $1 was worth 25,000 sucres. This was a terrible situation, and a lot of Ecuadorian families were destroyed, particularly in the area where I come from, in the south. It was a terrible situation. And of course, the rich people, as always, as for example, Guillermo Lasso, they only profited from this. Yes, he was the super minister at the time, right? In the government, in the Pascual administration, who was in office during this crisis. So now, getting to Arauz's proposals, if he comes into office, he says that in the first week, if I understand correctly, he'd like to he'd like to provide support for a high percentage of families. Is that not so? Well, yes, the question is always where we will find the funds if we are in this situation of economic crisis. What we believe is that the government needs to invest in the people. This government hasn't
Entonces, pues en este momento hay 8.080 millones de dólares en una cuenta en Suiza, ganando el 0.04% de interés, o sea, absolutamente nada. Entonces, de ahí pues vamos a utilizar estos 1.000 millones de dólares para darle pues a 1 millón de madres cabezas de familia para que ellas pues puedan invertir en la reactivación de la economía. ¿Y cómo trabaja esto?
To be able to support 1 million mothers. Hello? So, and how this would function is, what usually happens is that the mothers who are in charge of their families, they go to store.
Puede pagar pues sus tributos al Estado y el Estado puede pagar sus deudas y a sus empleados. Entonces, de esa forma se reactiva completamente la economía y pues volvemos a tener pues flujo de dinero, que es lo que necesitamos.
Bueno, una cosa también quiero hablarle es que yo escuché que Andrés.
One thing that I'd like to mention is that I heard Andres Moreno say that he'd worked up until his last day in office for Washington. Andres, on the other hand, says that he will have be in contact with everyone, and he mentions China. He mentions also Argentina. But China, I think, is a very important mention because part of the project from Moreno has been to oppose all of the proposals from China. But China has been a source of financing and independence from the US. I also don't want to, Andres also doesn't want to come into a conflict with the US, but there's no interest in being so submissive. So it's important to have the different sources and not to think that one needs to only be at the service of Washington. It's important to acknowledge that we are an independent country in Ecuador and we have no reason to fight against anyone. Andres Arauz has and will have good relations with all of the other countries, but they should also respect our independence, as it should be. So what happens with the loans that the US usually gives us in comparison to other countries, such as China? Well, the US wants to set conditions on how we need to handle with our own economy and our people. There are very clear impositions from the World Monetary Fund which tell us that we need to privatize and fire people. And these are policies that are not in the benefit of the people, and they don't work in Ecuador. Now, what happens with China? When we have a loan from China, yes, they do set conditions on how to make the payment. And of course, this is all right. They need to set these conditions. So they say, for example, half will be with currency and the other half with oil. And after that, you are free to carry on the policies of your country in any way which, as you wish to do so.
A China y a otros países que nos den a nosotros.
Other countries, however, are demonizing China and demonizing different countries that give us more, this kind of more free loan. Of course, as any kind of company, the IMF wants to control loans. So going into the issue of migrants in the US and Canada, I assume that there are different alliances underway. You've mentioned, I believe, Mexico, and it's also important to think about the situation of migrants from Ecuador.
Entender pues que ahora, primeramente,
of course, it's very important to understand, first of all, as long as the Citizens' Revolution came into power, we stopped having this massive exit of migrants. Migrants started entering the country with the visas or with different benefits. It's very different to how people left the country before. And it's what we're seeing right now, again, very strongly. We were talking recently in the South area with our migrants who have returned to Ecuador. Those are people who left the country and have gone back to Ecuador because they have a dream of having a life there with their family and their children. So what's happening right now? Thanks to the government of Lenin Moreno, who has not shown any concern with this very vulnerable group, they are now leaving the country again in droves, paying up to $30,000. So again, we need to have this strong connection with Mexico, which is precisely in the border. And we've always had excellent relations and a lot of support. And I can tell you all about it and about the work I've done when I was in the consulate. Now, this vulnerable group, again, is leaving the nation with other migrants crossing the border. So we need to do very strong work, specifically with the Mexican government, for them to tell us what's happening. A lot of people lose their lives along the way. I've seen in other interviews that you've mentioned this, I believe it's organic law of human mobility. You said it hasn't been upheld, and also that you'd like to see some changes in this law. Could you share us more about this? Yes, in the year 2007, the Organic Law of Human Mobility was passed, which has to do with the rights of
Pues, ¿qué es lo que pasa?
migrants in Ecuadorian soil and also abroad. Now, what happens with this law? This law has many articles which really ensures the rights that we need to have, but they have not been respected. From articles from 41 to 51, they talk about, for example, the rights of the returned migrants, and this hasn't been respected, but there are also several modifications that are needed. We need to include the group of undocumented people in Ecuador, people who have crossed the borders without regular situation. This is a large group, almost 50% of the migrants here in the US, and they also need to be included in the organic law of human mobility as a vulnerable group, because under the Constitution of the US, they have no right to housing, work, and health access. That's why we need to support them and include them in the organic law of human mobility.
Los hijos de
We
hijas de
also should include the sons and daughters of our migrants who stay in Ecuador because they need a constant support from the state, specifically psychological support. And the state needs to ensure that these children grow healthy, and so that when they are adults, they can also be productive members of society. We also need to continue working with the articles that are already part of the law. For example, number 35, which states we have the right to receive, for example, the services in health services also beyond the Ecuadorian borders. This is very, very necessary. It is so expensive that undocumented people have no access to this. The law already describes this. The law already says that we have the right to have access to these health services, but this is not respected. This is the letter of the law, and we need to work for it to be a reality, and that is a control that we need to do from the National Assembly. So an undocumented person living in the US, let's say, through the health services from Ecuador, they would have access to a health insurance. Yes, a health insurance that with the voluntary support, that's a voluntary contribution that is $72 per person. This would ensure complete services, pharmaceutical services, and they would have to pay also a bit more for their retirement, but this would ensure complete health access for them. And this is key for the migrants. I saw the very serious need to have these services quickly and effectively ensured. There's a problem that was mentioned many times here, that migrants work, they save with a lot of sacrifice, and then they invest in Ecuador, and they fall prey of frauds because there's not enough control there. There's a lot of people who take advantage of these situations. I know this happens. Even though people already know that this is a situation that comes up, it's difficult. They are experts in confusing people. And that is also responsibility of the state. The state should protect them. The state is there to prevent this. Migrants work so many hours, and then suddenly someone comes along and steals their money. Yes, this is a problem that I have heard in so many different states. We've been in North Carolina, in Florida, in Illinois, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. Everyone has shared the same. What is the dream of us, Ecuadorian? Well, of course, it's to invest in our country, to have our piece of land, our house, our business. But most of us can't travel to do that. We send this money to our friends or family, and of course, they sometimes misspend it or don't do the necessary investments because they didn't work for this money. Sometimes we ask also our family to tell us if they know any architect or engineer that can help us do these different works, the different work that we need. And then that's when the problem comes, that they steal from these people. So what we're trying to do is with the commercial office that we have abroad, which is pro-Ecuador, migrants can go and find information on private and public projects where they can invest safely, as well as a list of professionals that have been validated by this office so that they can also, again, contact them with safety. This would also benefit the state, since a lot of public construction in the small rural towns would also benefit from the reactivation and the investment that they can send. So this is a very important point. It doesn't require any large change in terms of law, just leadership and someone that ensures this gets done.
De los años cuando usted llegaste a los Estados Unidos,
I haven't seen the numbers precisely, but I think that around the years that you came to the US, the amount of money that migrants would send back was about 6% of the GDP. Isn't so? It's huge. It's what many states spent in health, for example. And what is the number now? 2019, the state received $3,200 million from the US and Canada. It's the second income from the country. There was also some income from Europe, but basically the people who are supporting the country are the migrants in the US and Canada. In Europe, this number has decreased a lot due to problems that they've had last year. This money, this income isn't being redistributed.
no sé si...
Despite the fact that we have our rights ensured according to our Ecuadorian constitution. Well, we've been talking about an hour. Perhaps it's a good moment to get into the Q&A. Let's see if other people have questions as well.
Ok, aquí está una pregunta.
Okay, here we have a question.
Stanfield Smith pregunta, si hay fraude el 7 de febrero, ¿puede haber alguna manera de organizarse en los Estados Unidos para ayudar con denunciar aquí en los Estados Unidos? Porque, bueno, hay que esperar.
So we have a question from Stan saying, February 7 election, if there's fraud here, is there some way to contact someone or organize a response here against in the US?
Asambleístas andinos Pues recientemente, el día de hoy, nos dieron el recinto electoral aquí.
Recently, just today, we had an office here in Queen where we had around 3,000 votes, most of them from Citizens' Revolution. There's a persecution. They want to crush this election. We need to denounce this fraud from now. We need to talk about this. We need to share it in social media. And if there's any institution that wants to help us, then that will be very well received. We need all of the support possible.
Es un rumor, no sé si se atrevan.
And another question from a friend. We don't know if they'll dare to, but there is a rumor about trying to delay or cancel the election. So what if that comes to be?
Todo puede llegar a pasar, así que tenemos que estar vigilantes, pero más que todo tenemos que empezar a actuar. Tenemos que empezar a actuar.
Most of all, we need to start acting. We need to start denouncing, to move in social media. Whatever happens and whatever they want to do, we need to act. We cannot simply be alert and see and watch this happen. We need to denounce what's needed.
Alguien dice, ¿cómo puedo votar en Queens? Mi pasaporte.
Someone here is asking, how can I vote in Queens? My Ecuadorian passport is not current. Due to the pandemic, there's no problem at all. You can go and vote even if your passport has expired. And just today, if you wait for just 1 second, I can give you the direction where you can head this office that was confirmed just today. It will be in John Boney High School in Main Street, Flushing, New York. I will send the address to you so that you have it, so that you can all share it.
Hablamos de eso. ¿Sabes qué Corea es?
Now Joe is simply reading different questions. Some repeat themselves. And right, we know that Correa has been a very good friend to Venezuela. So what is the foreign policy from Arauz be like in general and with Venezuelans specifically? If Venezuela opens their arm to us as any other country, then we'll have a very respectful relation. We are sister nations. We are both nations looking for free, just, and egalitarian societies. So if we have the sisterhood, why not continue building upon it? All right, we also have a question here. How many Ecuadorians in the US are expected to vote? We know this is difficult to calculate, but how many are there? And how many are expected to vote? Well, there's a clear fault here in the self-criticism that no Ecuadorian government has made a census of how many Ecuadorians are in the US, which would also be important to include us in the national budget. It is said that we are more than 1,700,000 and expected to vote in the tri-state area, where most of the voters come from, are about 82,000 voters. In the whole of the US and Canada, about 200,000 voters.
Carlos Pérez. Aquí la candidatura de Carlos Pérez. Alguien pregunta, Danny Shaw pregunta, ¿es verdad?
So Danny Shaw asks, is it true that Carlos Pérez insulted Venezuela? Well, yes, that's true, says Joe. Jaco Pérez insulted, well, yes, he supported also the coup in Bolivia. He's a reactionary who disguises himself. His name is Carlos Pérez Guatemberg. His name is not Jaco. He changes his name. He uses this kind of aliases because he wants everyone to pay attention to him. He had short hair, now he has long hair, he changes the way he's dressed. He's just an imposter, in my personal opinion. And I agree, says Joe.
Mónica, ¿cuándo gane los cerca? ¿Qué hará usted para el feriado de la patria? Para el, ok. Bueno, esa es la pregunta, es cuando gane las elecciones.
So now we have a question that says, when you win the elections, what will you do in the name of justice? I know that Arauz mentioned a Commission for Truth. He also talked about inviting the United Nations special repertoire for judicial independence or something like that in order to fix this entire, I don't even know what to call it.
Aquí Lenin Moreno ha utilizado al Estado para
The thing is that here,
para hacer una persecución feroz. Entonces, hay un montón de rollos entre
Lenin Moreno uses the judicial power for this fierce persecution. So there's a lot of issues here, and we are not sure who's working for whom. So first, once Andres Arauz is in office, he will be in the executive power, and then we can start making an exhaustive investigation. It won't be resolved from one day to the next, but we know our goal is to reactivate the economy. What we need is political reform. The people are affected. We know what's happening in the state. Aside from this group of the media who continue to lie and persecuting people, so they don't know what to believe in. What we need to do is to start working in this project to retake the power of these institutions of the state. What are are there any specific proposals to democratize the media? Because they have played an essential role in this persecution. And during the entire administration of Moreno, this has been an essential element. We already had a law, a communication law, which was passed and implemented during the government of the Citizens' Revolution. Right now, it has been rejected. So what we need to do right now is to work in a strong law. So what's happening is essentially the fifth power, the sixth power of the state. It's communication, because you turn on your TV and the same thing happens abroad. And what you see there, you believe is the truth, specifically, and that's mostly when they are so huge, these huge channels and broadcast networks. It's difficult for people to realize that they only work considering their own benefit. That's why this law was created. This law forced the media to tell the truth. And if they didn't, well, they were prosecuted, as it should be, because communication cannot be used to spread lies. That's why there's so much hatred from the media towards Rafael Correa, because it was the first time someone tried to stop them. One thing that I saw is that just as soon as Moreno came into office, just as it happened with Macri, well, Moreno was a betrayal, but Macri was, let's say that Lasso won. It's not true that simply changing the person in who is president, there's a true change. How do we ensure that we have independent media, knowing that this cannot change overnight? Well, that's very difficult, Joe. It needs to be something to work towards, but it also involves a lot of money and millions of dollars, but are involved here. So if I don't have the funds, let's say, to build something, as these different broadcast channels that are so powerful, these networks that are working jointly with the ones in the US, they have the power, they have the funds to invest. It's very difficult to create truly independent media that are strong enough to confront and oppose these other networks that have years and years of work. That is why Rafael Correa worked so hard in creating state media that is actually independent. And of course, this is also a self-criticism. There's a government that cared about people, that cared about reducing poverty, but then another government comes that will also have control on this state media, and they will say and spread the lies. So they should really belong to the people, but that's very difficult. Well, perhaps one could ensure maybe a subsidy for the people, and the people could send this to whatever media they choose. I believe in a way that internet and social media have helped. I myself have a program on Ecuador Facts that has a large audience, and it's the only place where we can say things as they are. We can tell the truth and people can listen to us. I do believe Ecuador has understood this campaign. I believe the outlook of people have started changing. They know the media lies. Certain groups still are in power in how they control news, but there is a change in the audience towards more independent media. Someone asks, how will the situation change specifically if this Arauz is elected? If someone has been imprisoned unfairly, well, they will need to be released. That is what we will work on. That justice really is blind, as we know, the famous statue, and to do justice to people who are innocent and have been imprisoned due to persecution. We cannot stand anyone to be imprisoned when they're innocent, and a vice president elected democratically by their people cannot be in prison. Okay, someone asks, where can we see the results of the elections? Well, it's an important question. Andres Arauz will have his own system.
Tenemos un sistema y yo creo que es a nivel nacional y en el exterior, pues
information. Yes, we have, and this is something that we will be working on. We know that money can change the minds of people.
De la votación, que es el día más importante, lo que yo siempre digo. Pudimos haber tenido la mejor campaña, la gente nos pudo haber conocido, pero si el día de las elecciones nosotros no estamos vigilantes de cada uno de los votos, vamos a perder.
Hello? Yes.
We will be defending each one of the votes.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, you're still on. You're still on and live.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yes, you're still on, and I think I lost.
Okay, she's there. All right.
No, I'm here.
Okay, I think I'm gone through all the questions here. So unless you have anything, Elaine, I think we can end it there. No mind.
Muchísimas gracias, pues para mí ha sido un verdadero honor haber compartido contigo.
Thank you very much. For me, it's been a true honor to share with you, Joe, Elaine, Roger, and Anna, who's there in the interpretation booth. Thank you very much for your time and the space. And what I'd like to ask everyone is to fight February 7th, we need to fight and to really bring about transformation. And the left that we
tenemos que realmente trabajar esta vez sí por nosotros, por nuestros pueblos, porque lo necesitamos. Así que thank you so much, everybody, for your time, and I hope you invite me again.
Muchas gracias, Monica. Buena suerte. Thanks so much, Elaine. Thanks so much, Elaine. That was